When is it time to replace flex discs? So today we're going to talk about these guys, the disc known as a flex disc or flex joint that joins your transmission and your drive shaft. And we're going to look at the three types of Mercedes flex discs. This is the early disc that was substituted with a 189 number. Now if you take one of these out, it probably means it's really old, because these sort of fell out of use about 15 years ago and they were subbed up to a 189 part number that was developed for the 300 added hour. And while they're okay, the new part number is better and it's not very expensive. It's like $60, which in Mercedes world is quite inexpensive. Then we're going to look at these guys, the ones that have movable metal inserts that were used on cars with M103 engines and M102 engines. And I've never liked these very much. These discs, we're going to talk about some options for them that you might want to consider if you have one, because they only last for so many miles. And then we're going to look at the typical solid rubber disc. In this case, this is an older disc from a V8 car, that like a 560 SL, but Mercedes used flex discs of this style on 123s that were a little smaller, and we're going to talk about how these can go bad and what to look for. So first, let's look at the early disc. As you can see, this early disc has a lot of deep spaces between its metal joints, and you'll find the bolts for these things actually fit relatively tightly in these holes. This is a problem because taking them out can really be quite difficult. But where these guys fail, you usually see two different failure patterns. You'll see cracks along the center, and sometimes these cracks can be obfuscated by the drive shaft flange itself. And then you'll see this other thing that happens where cord starts to pop out. Now it's real hard to see, but you could see nylon cord popping out of this. So these are bound with a nylon cord, and then they were vulcanized. That is covered in rubber. And one of my biggest pet peeves about these drive shaft flex discs is, even if they look nice, once you put them on and retorque them and they distort, you can get a heck of a vibration. On some models, such as the W111, you know, the 220B, SB, SEB, there were different length bolts for the transmission side and for the drive shaft side, so don't get them mixed up, or else your bolts will hit the back of the transmission flange. Now, one of the things I love, or I should say I personally love, about these early flex discs, other than their dependability and the fact that they lasted for decades, servicing them, changing them or replacing them is really easy, and they're very tough. There's among the toughest flex discs out there, and they will go for many years with cords sticking out and cracks in the flex disc before they actually give up the ghost. So you really need to get to these early before they fail, because if they do fail, they can send a projectile right through the transmission tunnel. Now we're going to talk about these. Now these are known for their metal inserts coming loose before the rubber comes loose. And I always tell people this: if you have a car with an M102 or 103 engine, take a rear flex disc and put it on the front. The rears are much tougher. I think this is a front from a 300E, but I'm not entirely sure. And these, unlike the new 189 flex disc, these are directional. And it says in German, this side to gearbox. So if you're putting it on, this side needs to go to the transmission, this side needs to go backwards. And one of the things that I noticed about these, so these are almost all made by SGF, at least the good ones. If it's not made by SGF, if it doesn't say SGF on it, it's junk. It's like a Meili or a Euro parts, throw it in the trash. Don't think about installing it unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, okay, I understand, but don't give it very long. Now, my biggest gripe about these is these little metal inserts will come loose, and then they will create a wicked vibration at high speeds. If you have a 300 SE or something, you'll get this weird oscillation and this vibration. It's because these inserts are loose in the drive shaft, or you'll hear it clung, 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 you know. But sometimes they'll go bad without any sign of failure at all. So I'm not really sure what to think. Now, These are the most common style of flex disc. Now I brought the biggest one, the 107 part number, and one of the reasons that I brought this early 107 411 0215 part number is to show you how they fail. I could have brought a new one. The new ones are a 126 number, by the way, but this number was developed, you know, way back in 1972 for the 107 cars. Maybe it wasn't 72, sorry, maybe it was 74. But they were used on 450 SLs, 450 SEL 6.9s. They were used on 116s with V8 engines. All because, you know, Mercedes wanted a large universal flex disc, and this design persisted until the end of the 126s. And so these are very durable. They're not known for blowing apart or failing, but if you want the absolute smoothest ride in your Mercedes, you may want to consider replacing these if you can swing the money for either a genuine Mercedes part or, surprisingly, a Febby kit, because in the Febby kits are SGF flex discs, and they're well made enough to where I actually say, yeah, I use them. Now, these guys fail in a very interesting way. The cracks that they get are kind of small, but you'll see a raised area, and what this raised area isn't just the rubber cracking, it's the nylon cord shrinking and stretching, and sometimes even failing inside the flex disc. So they're not real flexible because the rubber's super hard, but failures can occur underneath the surface of the rubber. That's why I say if you have an original one, and believe me, a lot of cars are running around with their original flex discs or very old flex discs. But oftentimes we pull, I was working on my buddy Kip's 6.9 the other day. Flex discs were original. You know, it's a 65,000 mile car. The back one seemed to be okay. We'll see. I'll probably change it when I do some additional repairs in the car before it goes home. But the front one was what really got me, because when I started looking at it and putting a little pressure on it, I could see that there were cracks in the rubber, and that's when you replace it. So anyway, that applies for all 123 series flex discs. It applies to early V8 flex discs. It applies to any solid disc. 202, 210, you know, all of those cars. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the bell for notifications, and I hope you guys come back here in the future for more great Mercedes knowledge.